Hello, and welcome to Centuries in Minutes, where we jump back and take a look at some of the most important people and places in world history. I am Oscar Gola, and I will be leading you back to a time where the world was being taken over by one of history's most expansive and quickly formed empires. Of course, I'm talking about the Mongols and their reign of supremacy that took hold of most of Asia for nearly the entirety of the 13th century. Now, I'm sure most of you know of Genghis Khan and have perceptions of these people as an extremely violent society. Well, that is partially true. Actually, mostly true. But that's not how this story starts, and that's not where we're going to begin today. As always, we only have a few minutes together, so let's jump right in, starting with the foundations of the empire. The foundations of the Mongol Empire are fairly simple, as many of the nomadic Mongol tribes were initially not well connected or organized. The Mongol tribes were nomadic herders that would move their flocks of animals throughout the Mongolian homeland in temporary tent structures known as yurts. The instability of life on the steppe created conflict, as the region was subject to many conditions that could affect a tribe's livelihood, such as droughts, long winters, and diseases. Tribes would often have to fight to protect what they had, creating societies that were fairly militarized. During this time, a boy by the name of Temujin was born, in one of the sporadically placed Mongol tribes that occupied the region. All it took to change the fortunes of the Mongols was a charismatic leader with a political vision that could unite the tribes, so that young boy Temujin was able to rise up into a position of power through valiant displays of success on the battlefield as a warrior, including leading his people to victory during a civil war. By the year 1206, many of the tribes were united as a confederation under Temujin, who would soon be recognized as the Great Khan and the ruler of the steppe people. The man now known as Genghis Khan was ready to lead his people to the start of the Mongol Empire. Now, this is the part where we discuss how the Mongols got their vicious reputation. After the Mongol tribes were connected as a powerful unit, the nomadic people still required a constant supply of goods, labor, and transportation. So, this is the part where most of the killing, looting, and pillaging really comes into play. The Mongols were very good at taking control of a region and its people, getting rid of those who resisted by killing the men, and using the women as concubines to expand their warrior empire. In fact, they were so successful that there was a 0.5% chance that you're related to the big man Genghis Khan himself, although his body has never been discovered to conform any form of relation. Anyway, the Mongols developed into an extremely strong military force that led these once simple nomadic tribes to become a source of fear within the region. Genghis Khan was able to spread his empire from Mongolia and northern China all the way to eastern Iran during his lifetime, controlling a region that stretched over millions of square miles. The Mongol Empire grew quickly, and it was because they formed a unique fighting style using horses and archery, which led to an easy way of dispatching slow foot soldiers that were oftentimes using non-ranged weapons while fighting the Mongols. Genghis Khan's army never reached numbers over 130,000, and they were able to travel varying long distances in short periods of time. Mongol warriors would often only carry bare essentials for staying alive during transport, taking just a few weapons with minimal amounts of food and drink. In fact, the Mongols preferred mares as the way to get around because they could drink the milk from the horse, and even cut open a vein and seek out blood as a refreshment. The Mongols were quick to adapt, and when they attacked in a vicious manner. The Mongols would not hesitate to take down an entire community and slaughter anyone standing in their way. This led to the Mongols gaining a reputation in the area, and eventually people began to surrender as soon as they arrived, in order to avoid having everyone in their villages mercilessly killed. The Mongols were happy to agree to let everyone live in their empire as long as they were willing to pay farming taxes and stay in line. And believe me, the ones that knew what the Mongols were capable of knew not to cross them. Or else. Of course, most of this was done before the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, but for a while after his demise, the Mongol Empire found a way to continue growing into areas like Russia, Poland, and Hungary, under the control of his 4 sons. Genghis Khan was not much for administration and left the governing of his empire to others, but a while after his death, A power struggle emerged between his successors, creating a rift between the four sections of the empire known as Khanates, which will be discussed later. The first successor of Genghis Khan to take over as Great Khan was his third son Ogedei. He was able to successfully foster the growth of the empire into Europe until 1241. Growth was severely hindered after the death of the next Great Khan, Mongke, in 1259, after a 7-year reign saw the hostility grow between Khanates. As I mentioned earlier, the territory was separated into four regions known as Khanates: the Il Khanate, Changde Khanate, Khanate of the Great Khan, and the Golden Horde. Each of these Khanates would eventually become separately ruled regions. But under Mongol rule, the communities within these four Khanates were able to thrive after the initial takeover. Although many areas were taken over using brutal force, once the Mongols were in power, there was a much more peaceful and civilized society that was set up, with very little discrimination or ostracizing of people from different backgrounds and with different beliefs. In fact, the Mongols ruled over a very diverse kingdom and built their society relying heavily on women, and they respected them for it, even though it didn't sound like it earlier when I mentioned that whole concubine thing. That happened to foreign enemies most of the time. Anyway, back to the lesson. Mongol women, on the other hand, had to handle nearly all the societal upkeep while the men would set out on lengthy military campaigns. Women were not able to inherit much unless they had husbands, but there are cases of them holding positions of power. Like when Genghis Khan's son Ogedei died and his wife took control over the Mongol Confederation for 5 years before handing power over to one of her sons. Women also had strong voice in court deliberations and could sway opinions of the men, which is how Mongke became Great Khan, after his mother Sorkatani Beki used her high political standing to sway the Mongol elders into electing her son. The Mongols also opened up the region to trade, allowing easy access for merchants to sell goods over a much broader region without fear of attack in areas under Mongol rule. Trade was an essential part of the Mongol society even before their military success, and control over a larger region meant that there was a much more expansive trade market that could spread goods and services to help keep the empire stable. The Mongols successfully created an elaborate system that included passports for merchants, which allowed for easy commerce amongst Mongol patrons. Much of the success of this open market system can be attributed to Kublai Khan, who staked his claim as Great Khan after the death of his brother Mongke. Kublai Khan was mainly focused on the conquest of China, becoming emperor of the region during his time in power, but he did set his sights on Japan and was getting ready to attack using a fleet of ships until the intervention of a, well, divine wind, also known as a typhoon, which ended up destroying most of the fleet. During his time in charge, Kublai Khan moved the Mongol culture away from the plundering days in the steppe to create a more settled society in China, after the death of his two favorite sons. Another key part of the Mongol Empire was their extremely tolerant views on other religions, and mostly letting conquered people worship as they saw fit, creating a large multicultural society. People were far less willing to rebel if they didn't have much to complain about, and the threat of taking on Mongol warriors was also a great deterrent for stopping an uprising before it could even begin. This led to a more peaceful integration of people from different regions, as those within the empire were not forced to change their lives completely after being taken over. However, there were some people understandably angered by the high cost of farming taxes, but they knew better than to challenge the Mongols. Religious freedom in the empire allowed for many different cultures to mix, which is something uncommon for the time that is fairly reminiscent of modern society. The Mongols took control over an absolutely massive area that reached heights challenging many of the world's great kingdoms throughout the course of history. However, the empire does not get as much praise as places like Rome, simply due to their lack of longevity. The Mongols were having way more fun acquiring land rather than ruling over the territory, and the empire only lasted 162 years due to reliance on societal upkeep from outside forces. In fact, most of the Khanates faded out of Mongol control except for the Khanate of the Great Khan near China, that was also eventually taken over and became part of the Ming dynasty. The connected kingdoms allowed for many societal advances, and there is no doubt the Mongols have their fingerprints all over modern society, but the maintenance of the empire was never a top priority. It was always about getting more for most of the Great Khans, so when things began to fall apart, it was easy for new regimes to step in and take control. But I mean, there's no reason to feel bad for the Mongols. They had a good run at the top. And they also killed a lot of people. Like, when I say a lot, it's estimated that millions were killed by the Mongols. And I don't want to make these images too graphic, so just imagine a lot of dead people. Or I mean, you could look it up for yourself, which I wouldn't recommend. Basically, these warriors weren't nice guys. And I'm pretty sure all of the societal advances and religious tolerance wasn't because they had kind hearts either. They were really just trying to benefit themselves, which they definitely did. Ultimately, the Mongols left a big mark on the world during their short time in power, and many historians will argue that their conquest paved the way for a transfer from feudalism into a more modern era. So they did some good things and some bad things, but I mean, nobody's perfect, right? Anyway, that should just about wrap it up for us this time on Centuries and Minutes. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to stick around and check out our upcoming episode on the Crusades. And as always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. And thanks for checking out this episode of Centuries and Minutes. See you next time. Actually, real quick, I just want to set the record straight here. I know I made it sound like this is going to be a series and all, but it's kind of a one-time thing. So, I said see you next time and all, but there probably won't be a next time, so in that case, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Actually, even better, a great week. I'm Oscar Gola, and that just about wraps it up, so I guess this is goodbye.